Hello and welcome to Adventures in Theater History, where we bring you the best stories from the deep and fascinating history of theater in the city of Philadelphia. I'm your host, Peter Schmitz, and our theme music, it's by Christopher Mark Colucci. In this episode, as we continue our Season 4 exploring the modern history of Philadelphia nonprofit theater, we tell the story of one small peripatetic theater company that did not originate in Philadelphia, that does not have its own dedicated performance space or even a dedicated core company of performers. But, as we shall see, it does have one of the most intriguing and dynamic artistic philosophies in the local theater scene that has served to bring the deep history of theater into the living present. The EgoPo Classic Theater. And here to tell EgoPo's history is an interview with its founder and longtime artistic director, Lane Savadove. Lane Savadove is a professor of theater, the head of directing, and the chair of theater and dance at Rowan University in Glassboro, New Jersey. Lane received his BA from Haverford College in the Philadelphia suburbs and his MFA in directing from Columbia University in New York. Lane has also worked and trained closely with such innovative American theater makers as Judith Malina at the Living Theater, Lee Brewer at Mabu Mines, Ping Chong, and Anne Bogart. Lane was the recipient of a TCG leadership grant and was a Henry Luce Fellow back in the 1990s, in which capacity he served as the resident director of the National Cultural Center of Indonesia in Surakarta, Java. He has also held faculty positions at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, Loyola University in New Orleans, and the National University of Indonesia. Lane is the founding artistic director of EgoPo Classic Theater, which began its life in San Francisco, California, and for a period was then based in New Orleans, Louisiana, and then moved to Philadelphia after the disruptions of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Notable productions from the past seasons of EgoPo include John Guare's Leidy Breeze trilogy, Samuel Beckett's Company, Tennessee Williams' A House Not Meant to Stand, Frank Wedekin's Spring Awakening, and Maurice Maeterlinck's The Bluebird. Lane's 2017 EgoPo production of Chekhov's The Seagull won a Barrymore Award for an outstanding production. In 2024, Lane returned to Indonesia and forged an international company with both American and Javanese artists, and the resulting multimedia production of the classic epic The Ramayana at the Philadelphia Navy Yard won the Barrymore Award for Best Outdoor Production. And recently, as we shall hear, he has been doing particular work on the history of Philadelphia theater. I spoke to Lane over Zoom in June of 2026. Lane Savadove, welcome to Adventures in Theater History.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you here. Tell us about your origin story. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? How'd you first fall into theater as a calling?
Yeah, I'm actually Philadelphia area born and raised. I was a suburban Cheltenham kid, son of divorced parents, living in two houses my entire childhood, which is sort of just part of my identity, I think. And my dad was obsessed with live performance, and it could be opera, orchestra, theater. And because he was a single dad for a big stretch of time, he would drag his two sons along to whatever he wanted to go see, and we had to learn to like it. And he was actually obsessed with Beckett. One of the most early theater memories I have is seeing Billy Whitelaw in Rockabye at La Mama, of all things. I think I was probably like 8 or something when I saw it. But
no
my dad
kidding.
wasn't that sophisticated theatrically. He wasn't like an avant-garde guy. He was a lawyer, but he just sought out things that he thought were groundbreaking and memorable and historic. And he had read about the fact that she was stopping by La Mama to do it for a very short run. I certainly didn't understand it as a child, but it left a imprint in my mind.
It didn't
And
scar you for life.
it didn't, it didn't,
It
well,
intrigued
I
you.
don't know. Scars are, you sure it did, right? Because scars are permanent imprints that shape who you are. So,
Okay.
those scars, yeah, they shape who you are. Certainly going to the opera twice a year at the Met was a scarring. I did not like it.
Wait, well,
And it
so
really was
Savadov,
like,
is Savadov an Italian name? Is it?
no, it's a Russian name. It was
It's a Russian
Savadovsky
name.
originally.
Savadovsky.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting. I did not know that.
But for my dad, I think the arts were just a way to more deeply assimilate and
Okay.
sort of fully participate in society. And my dad was just like, find the pleasures in life while you can, be it food or live performance. And the opera specifically, because it was twice a year on a very regular basis. And actually, a funny story about going to the opera is I think we started going to the opera when I was like 5. I would fall asleep on this lady's lap who sat to my left. And, it was season ticket holders back then. You would end up in the seats with the same
Right.
people. And she always brought this fur coat that she would fold up on her lap, and I would sleep on it even in the midst of summer. And so her name was Kitty. And I thought she just called herself Kitty for me as a little kid and because it was a fur. And so she'd be like, you can sleep on Kitty's lap. And only years later was I watching a rerun of a game show and realized I'd been sleeping on Kitty Carlisle's lap my entire childhood.
Kitty Carlisle Hart was your
Yeah,
seatmate.
yeah. So that was my experience of the opera. But being in the opera, what I do
And she was
remember
in
is
the Marx Brothers A Night at the Opera, wasn't she?
that's right. That's
That's
right. Um,
right. Oh, that's very deep theater history cut. That's
yeah.
amazing. And was this at the Met
This was
in New
at the
York?
Met. Yeah. My dad had
Okay.
his seats at the Met for
Right.
decades and decades and decades. And it was a major expense. It wasn't like we were wealthy. Like that was what my dad
Invested.
did with free time and the money that we had. And so when I would watch, I was, very bored at operas. But what I was curious about is what was going on backstage. I always wanted to know what the life of these actors were. Where were they when they left stage for a half an hour? And who was back there changing their costumes? And were they bored? Did they just go to sleep? Or were they standing there still in character? And I was really interested in what the through line of the entire theatrical event was.
I went to theater as a kid too, but I remember my impulse was always, I wonder what it's like to be on stage and do that. So obviously I
Yeah,
was
that's
connecting
not where
with
my impulse
performers,
was. Yeah.
but you were thinking about organizing the whole thing.
I was thinking about the mechanisms and also going, wow, there's got to be a way to do these operas where the acting isn't bad. There's got to be a way to make this as interesting as Hogan's Heroes. Like, why can't this be as interested in Hogan's Heroes to me as a 7-year-old?
You got to have standards. You got to
You
have
do.
standards. It's got to be Werner Klemper, Bob Crane.
So,
Skipping ahead, you
yeah,
end up going to college locally. You go to Haverford
I
College,
did.
the small was then all men's, yes? Or were you the first class of
No,
co-ed?
it was about 7 years into co-ed or something
Oh,
like
it
that.
was okay.
Yeah. Part of going to Haverford for me was I went to a Quaker high school out in Bucks County and had a continual interest in Quakerism and a sort of deeper level of spirituality. And so the idea of staying within that Quaker education was actually attractive to me at a young age. And for whatever reason, I felt strong about living close-ish to home. Yeah, and I like just the pure. I felt like it was the first place I went where it was like okay to be dorky and nerdy and bookish.
Right. Well, we've
Um,
talked about Quakerism with Grace Gunglewski recently and her
mm,
own interest in Quakerism. But I most point out to both of you that Quakerism is not a faith tradition that's known for its interest in theater. It's not.
no.
In fact, Haverford College historically, in the 19th century, didn't even allow students to have musical instruments in the room,
Yeah,
let alone staging plays.
I
However,
wasn't
I
particularly
imagine that
aware of that.
yes, I imagine that it changed by the late 20th century. Was there
It
any
did though.
way?
There was no theater to this day. There's no theater department there, so
True.
to my knowledge, or even a theater class. So all of the theater studies actually happen at Bryn Mawr,
Right,
and
which
that
does have an interesting theater
which
tradition.
does, and
Right,
that is really the beginning of my theatrical story. And it wouldn't happen without what happened there. So I went to college pre-med psychology double because I wanted to be a psychiatrist. So I was already obsessed. I was very set on this idea of reinventing the world of psychology to have the body be included in the process, not trapped inside of intellectual worlds. So I went to school to be a psychiatrist. I wanted to become potentially a neurobiologist, but I tried out for the freshman play because I was enjoying doing it in high school, and I got cast, in Cloud Nine by Carol Churchill when I was a freshman at Bryn Mawr, and
Who
loved
was
it.
the teaching the classes? Who was the director?
Back then it was all just adjunct teachers back then, and I don't even remember the name of
Wow.
the director of Cloud Nine. So it was in between theater instructors, which is an important part of the story. So I kept just doing theater as a side gig, and I was also on the soccer team. So I would have this crazy schedule of being in classes all day, go to soccer practice until 6, then go to theater rehearsals until 10. And then my sophomore year, they finally start to do a full-time hire, and I'm on the search committee. So, the
As a
candidates
student,
come
you're on the
in.
search committee.
I'm on the search. Like there's a student, often in searches, there's a student like committee inside of
Right.
it that sometimes gets to express their opinion. And often the candidates will do their classwork on those particular students. And so
Right.
one of those candidates was Mark Lord, who had just graduated from the DFA in dramaturgy from Yale. I was doing my own production of The Maids by Genet. And so Mark worked with me on Claire and the Maids during his interview, and Mark got hired. So starting my junior year, Mark was the head of the theater department. When Mark came, everything changed.
Yes,
And
yes. And we're going to
people's,
talk to Mark later on the podcast.
oh,
So I think
you
it's
are? Oh,
fantastic that you're
awesome.
introducing him now.
Perfect, Rich.
Yes.
Yeah, and he changed so many people's lives, Peter. And I think chronologically, I'm probably the first. And when Mark came on, he opened one simple cognitive door, which was that theater was an art form. And it's so simple to say those words, theater is an art form. But in so many programs in this country, theater is treated as a biz. And they say it all the time, theater's a biz. And you can't get away with saying theater is a biz and then flippantly go, and it's an art form. Make up your mind. It cannot be both. And Mark had no interest or even knowledge of theater as a biz, didn't care. It was an art form. If we weren't interested in being as innovative as Duchamp, then why were we even bothering to do this? At the same time, Mark brought in this really heavy physical bent. Mark just plays theater games almost exclusively in his classes, highly physical theater games and in rehearsals, and you do them for hours. We're talking like 5 hours of theater games, 5 days a week for months on end. And you go through this wonderful transition that was everything that I was looking for in psychology, that you begin to think and feel through your body. And it slowly hit me over the course of about a year and a half. Oh, what I'm doing in soccer is trying to get purely in my body. And what these theater games are doing is doing even better, where you start to lose your brain, lose your mind, let's say, and become a holistic entity in space. And that was everything to me. And Mark's not like an expert pedagogue in physical theater. He's a brilliant dramaturg, director, teacher, thinker about theater, but not accidentally. He knew what he was doing by doing all of this physical work and letting us find our way to it. And so at the same time, I, on my own, found a book called Le Moi Po in French, which means the me ego or the skin ego. Le Moi is how the French say the word ego, the
Right.
me, and Po, P-E-A-U, for skin.
Right.
And it's by a writer named Didier Anzieux, who's French. And the book, I think, had recently been translated in the early 80s. And I got attracted to it because of the name. I was like, oh, this physical ego. Okay. And it is about the idea that the self lives in the skin of the body. And that became everything for me in life, that the self lives in the skin, the physical self. And so I used Le Moi Po to become EgoPo. It was PEAU for a while, and everybody was
Right.
calling it Ego Pew. And so I changed it to PO. And I did that while I was in college. I just sort of started going, here's my theory for what theater should be. And at some point, I dropped the pre-med. I kept the psychology double major. I became the first theater major at Bryn Mawr since Katharine Hepburn, and ended up doing everything I could to make the two meet, the psychology and the theater work, and did my thesis on a Beckett piece called First Love, and my psychology half on gender differences in dreams. And they came together for me to write this sort of treatise on what EgoPo meant and how it defined itself differently by gender back then. And
All right. So
um,
your whole entry into the theater was one that was of a artistic bent, non-commercial, highly intellectually, deeply intellectually grounded, I should say. And as you leave college, you don't go into mainstream commercial theater. What do you do next? You go to New
Yeah, what I
York?
do next is actually really, I tell my students this story all the time. So, yeah, so Mark had, and Mark would go, here's your reading list, read this, learn about this. And I
Right.
got obsessed with on the list with Judith Malina and the Living Theater. And I read Judith Malina's diaries and got obsessed with them. I mean, if anybody hasn't read Judith Malina's diaries, just dive in.
I'm raising my hand. Okay.
Oh my God, you have to, you have to, you have to. So I literally, in the first couple weeks after graduating, I drive to New York, find a phone booth so I can pick up a Yellow Pages, and I go Living Theater. I put money in, and I call the Living Theater,
We have to
and
explain this to anyone who's asking. Before
I
the
know,
internet, before the web, this is what you had to
I
do.
know.
There was
This is what
no
you had to do.
online
And
directory.
nobody had a New York phone book, in Pennsylvania. So I
Right.
literally had to drive to New York to get
That's
the phone book.
hysterical.
So dorkily, I was like, I just graduated from college as a theater major, and I'm very interested in the living theater. And could I meet with somebody? And they were like, yeah, come by, Third and C. And the phone hung up. And I was like, oh, okay, where's Third and C? And back then, Third and C was quite an adventure.
Yes, yes,
Um,
that was deep into Alphabet City, which was
so I,
not a
yeah.
respectable part of town.
So I walked my way from Penn Station to Third and C and knocked on the door. An older hunchback woman opens the door, and I'm like, "Hi, I called you on the phone. I'm really interested." And she cuts me off, and she goes, "Do you know anything about tax law?" Uh, and I go, "Yeah, sure." My dad happened to be a tax attorney, so I was like, "Well, just by nature, I'm sure I know something." And she goes,
She was
"Great,
in
come
trouble with the
here."
feds, right? That was the thing with the
So
Living
she
Theater.
goes, come here. She
They were in
opens
trouble
a
with the
drawer
IRS.
mounded with receipts. And she goes, if we don't figure out these receipts, the IRS is going to kick us out of the country again. And it was Judith Malina who had
Right.
opened the door for me. And so I was like, great, I'll take care of this. And I just started driving to New York every single day and slowly kept reading books on nonprofit law and figured out how to file nonprofit tax returns, which, becomes a big part of my future that like I
I'll
learned theater
bet.
management on my own. And I file years worth of Living Theater's nonprofit tax returns in the midst of an audit where they probably would have gotten kicked out of the
Yeah,
country
you
again by
you
the
literally
IRS.
saved the Living Theater. Like that was your
I
first
did.
job.
And so I would sit there for the whole summer, and there was an old so there was a lot of squatters back then that the Living
Sure.
Theater sort of would
Yeah.
include, and the squatters would sleep in the theater, just hang out during the day. And there was an old guy who would just be constantly writing notes in a little tiny book and talking to me all the time, a little older bearded guy. And I'd be like, stop, stop, I'm trying to do this. And slowly I got assimilated to the theater. Eventually, Hanan Reznikov, who was Judith's second husband, invited me to do their street theater piece in August. And then he invited me to assistant direct their next show. And I'm working, working, working. And then one day when that show opens and now and like it happens in avant-garde theater, you go from assistant directing to like, hey, can you be in this one small scene, to I'm enlarging your part. So suddenly I'm acting in a living theater piece. And one day, a whole bunch of NYU students come in and they weirdly know my name. They're like, "You're Lane." I'm like, yeah. And they are like, "How did you get involved in living theater? Da 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 da. How are you such a?" And I was like, I just started working. And then they go, and what's it like just working alongside Allen Ginsberg every day? And that old street guy was Allen Ginsberg. The entire summer, I just sat like in a tiny little room with Allen Ginsberg bugging me and had no idea. And that's sort of how the Living Theater goes. And so I worked for the Living Theater. I became associate artistic director under Hanan and Judith. And then I did a similar move where I called up Mabu Mines, and then I ended up working for Lee Brewer and assistant directing their amazing production of King Lear called Lear. And I did the same thing with Ping Chong and worked on a Ping Chong piece. And all these were Mark Lord things, right? I would have known none of this had Mark Lord
Right.
not go, here's the reading list, read this. And to me, what life was as soon as I got out of college, if you wanted to do theater, you wanted to work with the Living Theater and Mabu Mines and Ping Chong. Like Ping Chong was the hot new one. And
Right.
so I just were like, wait, great, I'll work with those three. At that point in New York, I would try to see every show in the Village Voice, and I would each week I would cross them out, the ones I'd already seen. And I hit a point where I literally would get a Village Voice issue, and I go, I've already seen everything. It wasn't a
Wow.
big scene in the '80s, and there was
Right.
certainly nobody my age. Like everybody I was working, I very much felt like I was with Lee Brewer and Judith Malina, and like I was like, well, who's in their 20s? Who's the next avant-garde? And there really was very much no next avant-garde happening. There was a tiny bit, downtown, in like the kitchen in little tiny performance art venues. It was the time of Karen Finley, but it was all
Yeah,
solo
there
work.
was the Worcester group. There was,
There
maybe
was the Worcester group, but they're a whole generation older too.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so there was just no young scene of theater companies. I was like, who's the next open theater? Who's the next living theater? And so all the talk, you would go to parties in New York and everybody was like, San Francisco is where it's happening, man. You got to go to San Francisco. It's where the postmodern dance scene is happening. And I'm a very impulsive, committed person. If I have an idea to do something, I'm just going to do it. So at some point it was like, well, one must move to San Francisco. And so like I sent off a million phone calls, still not email yet.
Right.
A company reached out to me and said, "Would you be interested in stage managing for us?" And I was like, "Great!" And put a trailer in the back of my car and moved to San Francisco with a friend and began working for the Z Collective, that became Z Space Studio and was a real sort of nurturing ground for theater in San Francisco. And got myself a computer consulting job that let me do theater. And in fact, my boss built a rehearsal space and I started EgoPo. So within a few months there, I decide I'm going to do Casper by Peter Handke because I was still very influenced by Mark, and for Mark, Peter Handke was like
Right. So that's the one
the
about the
dude.
boy that was brought up in sort of a sensory deprivation.
Totally, totally.
Right, right,
And
right.
probably not
Caspar
a play that
Hauser.
would
Yeah.
interest me now. It's very much about semiotics and like it's a very heady play. But I was like, oh, I can make this physical. And so I put audition posters up all over San Francisco. I was like, I'm going to hit every telephone pole in San Francisco and like auditioned hundreds of people and put together a group. And we did Casper and opened up EgoPo. And like, I think that was 92,
Right. Well,
91 maybe.
that's what. So that explains why I can't find a lot about you in the sort of mainstream newspaper archives, which is what I generally go to when I'm looking
Hmm.
to interview someone. Because by the first mention I can find about you is in 1995. There's an
Right.
article in the San Francisco Chronicle which mentions that EgoPo, and it spells it the way it's spelled now, was already 4 years old. And
Yeah.
and so
Where'd they come from?
you were off the grid before that.
We
Um,
were. We did this. We did Hanukkah, and then we did a Beckett conglomeration called Breath, which was about 10 Beckett shorts, and that's what gives birth to Company.
Yeah,
And
the article I find is about this production of Samuel Beckett's 1981 radio play called Company, not the musical,
Yes,
which you had already mounted, it said, for a radio
correct.
station. So, because it is a radio play for KPFA
It's a
in
novella.
the,
It's actually a novella, and it's the last novella he ever finished. And yeah, so we were an active company, but back then it took years for you to get your first like mention in the newspaper.
right.
And so we were working away as a company, and at that point I was training full-time company members, and so we would rehearse probably 25, 30 hours a week year round train.
Doing the Mark Lord system as you were
The
doing
Mark
it,
Lord system in a
intensive
way,
games
and
and
then but
exercises. Yeah.
developing what I called, the EgoPo approach and the sort
Right.
of physical approach to each other. And KPFA, which is an NPR affiliate in Berkeley, very famous one, approaches us and says, "Do you want to do a Beckett play for the radio?" And I go, "Sure," but I wasn't really interested in Beckett's radio plays. I found them kind of un-Beckettian in a traditional sense. Often they're very sort of like broad and 1950s feeling. Some are different, but I proposed to them, hey, there's this novella that I love about a man lying on his back in the dark, slowly dying, and the voices talking in his head. And wouldn't that be perfect for the radio? And they were like, yeah, but Beckett's not going to allow you to do that. So I reached out through, I think it's Bouchard back then, to Paris, and they contact Beckett. I write up a few sentences about why this must be heard on the radio, and he goes, yeah. And so we're one of the only companies ever to be given permission to adapt Beckett prose. So we do it for the radio, and it's a topographical piece, meaning there's voices from afar, there's voices underneath you, above you, and we hear it gets sold all across the country. We listen to it, I think at like 1 a.m. as a company in our loft, and we're like, oh, well, that's that. There's no applause. There's nothing. Like, did
Yeah.
anybody listen to this? So I said, hey guys, how about we do it for a bunch of friends live so we get a little bit of applause? And the way that I used to rehearse it is I would lay on my back in the dark with my eyes closed because that's what the NPR audience was instructed to do, actually.
Right.
And I would listen to the piece and we would develop the topography by me laying on my back in the dark. And sometimes they would end up like touching me if it helped them do their physical action.
Ooh.
And it was great. There was this moment where the mother holds the hand of a little boy and lets it go, and I would feel that on my body. And so we're like, well, let's do that. And so we invited a bunch of friends to blindfold themselves on their back in the dark, and we did it to them live. And then they told friends, and then they told friends, and we would cook them. At first, we were cooking spaghetti dinners to thank them for letting us do this to them. So suddenly every weekend, Saturday and Sunday, we were cooking spaghetti dinners, and it was just word of mouth. And we, had a voicemail, and people would reserve. And then one day, a reviewer comes in. I think it was from the San Jose Mercury News, the first one, and we don't know it. So all of a sudden, we just that voicemail lights up. We're like, "What's going on?" And we realize a newspaper article has been published about the show, and we went, "Oh, geez, Louise, we better publicize this and start selling tickets." And the spaghetti dinners quickly became milk and cookies afterwards, and we started selling tickets. And the piece ran something like a year. We didn't even track it. We just kept running it forever.
Yeah.
And that's when the San Francisco Chronicle came and wrote this giant feature on it. And to this day, that piece continues. We're going to do it next year.
You did occasionally come back to the Philly area. I can see that in 1998 you directed a show at Ursinus College out in the western
Right. So
suburb.
that's the shift back east again. So I
Right.
meet Ann Bogart at a workshop in San Francisco. We're both teaching at it, physical theater workshop, and I recognize that I'm like, "Hey, you're teaching the same thing I'm teaching," and realize that accidentally I had been doing something very close to viewpoints for a long time. And Anne invites me to apply and come to Columbia for my MFA. And at that point, I was reaching about
Yeah, where
30.
she had just started leading the program there. Yeah.
Exactly. And I ended up at the same time getting a fellowship. So I got into Columbia, but I also got a fellowship to go to Indonesia for a year and become the resident director of the National Cultural Center of Indonesia.
How do we get to Indonesia? Why are you?
Um, yeah, so there was something called the Luce Fellowship, started by
Right.
Henry Luce. And
Time magazine fame. Yeah.
exactly. So I applied for that and was the first theater director ever to be given that. And through a long, its own story process, ended up in Central Java at the National Cultural Center as the resident director. And I spent a year there creating a sister company to EgoPo. I met 5 amazing guys who would become my artistic partners to this day. And we would train each other in each other's techniques. And we created the very first draft of our Ramayana at the end of the year, just a little like hour segment of it, which became this huge thing in Indonesia. People like came from all over the country to see it. It ended
Well,
up on the
see,
cover
because
of
I
the
spent
Time
so much
magazine.
time in I try to spend time in my theater history class talking about the Ramayana and talking about how important it is a story and the performance traditions associated with it. Had you been exposed to that before, or was this new to you, or did
No,
you go
when
there
I
seeking it out?
no, when I got the fellowships, when you get a loose fellowship, you don't know where you're going to go in Asia. You don't have to speak the language. It's actually better that you don't yet. And once you get your placement, you then go into heavy, heavy research. So I immediately dove into hours of language studies a day and hours of cultural studies a day. And one of the first things I did was pick up and read the Ramayana for the first time, and particularly a version by this absolutely brilliant man named William Buck, who translated both the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. I was just so inspired. I think I knew upon the first reading, I was like, "Oh, someday this has to be on stage in its entirety." And of course, I knew Peter Brook's Mahabharata.
That was very
We
big back
slowly
in the
found out
80s.
that
Yeah.
nobody had done the full Ramayana in any
No,
kind of what we would call theatrical form.
no, just in
Um,
puppets. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so, it was just part of my cultural studies going there. And eventually I told them I wanted to work on it. They thought I was absolutely insane. But they were happy to sort of, play with me on whatever I wanted to was interested. And I would do the same for them. There were projects that
Well,
they
that's
wanted to
what I
do.
try and tell my students is when I talk about say, Indonesian art, I say you can't. It's not something that's preserved in amber. It's not some ancient thing. There
Yeah.
are living, working artists who are developing the form, who are continue to explore, who are open to change and collaboration, and don't condescend to
That's
Asian
absolutely true.
traditional performance technique.
100%, Peter, and very few people recognize that. People think of Indonesia as people will fall in love in a colonial way with like the way that they'll fall in love with Indian dance, the way that Artaud did, right? Like,
Right,
oh, here's this amazing, sophisticated, ancient form that we must learn from. It holds all the secrets. And the Indonesians do not. That is not their relationship to their work. It is constantly fluid and evolving and highly avant-garde all the time.
right, right.
Yeah. I
So,
took
so
that
you
year and
how
then
do you
came
end up
back.
in from there to
Yeah.
New Orleans? You get all.
Oh my God. So that's, yeah, yeah. So I come back very short. So I come back from Indonesia, go to Columbia for grad school under Anne, obviously hugely influential, get my first job teaching at NYU in the directing program, teaching viewpoints, developing the idea of viewpoints for directors for the first time. And I go in the teaching market. New York, again, I hit the same phase in New York. I was like, and this time in New York, it was like, I can't afford to rent a rehearsal space, not for the kind of time that I want. Everybody's renting these tiny little, like, 10-foot rehearsal spaces for like 90 minutes at a time. And I was
Right.
like, I cannot make theater in this. And this is
No,
not
that's
what
when
the
the real
avant-garde.
estate market in New York became
Yeah, it was
so
awful.
overheated that it was impossible for artists to work the way they had once worked.
Exactly. And so I knew I had to get out. I knew because it was about making work. And in those days, the cocktail parties were all talking about New Orleans.
Were they?
Everybody in New York was like, I hear New Orleans is the great next place to go. And I was like, okay. And I got very lucky and got a teaching job at Loyola New Orleans and moved to New Orleans. And EgoPo at that point, eventually in New Orleans, created its own space and was really flourishing. We were back to sort of
So
year-round
the original
training.
company you had in San Francisco, those people didn't go with you to New York and to no,
They
but
did
so
not.
EgoPo travels with you. It becomes sort of your
It does
personal
for those
brand.
years.
Okay.
Yep,
And now you set up EgoPo in you have a small 50-seat theater in the Garden District.
we
What
do.
sort of works were you creating there?
The biggest thing, so we worked on Spring Awakening for a year, Vatican Spring Awakening, and that was my first. And I've returned to Spring Awakening many times, but that was the first really major iteration of Spring Awakening. Very proud of that. And then we work on The Maids Times Two, which came out of this crazy idea of actors approaching me, a male and a female actor approached me and were like, "Hey, Lane, I want to work on The Maids." I was like, "Yeah, but it can be either all male or all female. It can't be mixed." And so we're like, "Well, then do both." And we developed an experiment that we would work for nearly a year in separate rehearsal spaces, with me as director, but two different casts. So to see if only cast itself being changed would change the product. And I tried very hard to just Ouija board it and see where these two casts took me. And we ended up with two very different versions of The Maids that we would
Right.
run back to back with a dinner break in between.
But then the levees in 2005,
Then
the
the
levees
levees broke.
break. The levees broke. Hurricane Katrina arrives. Were you there
Yeah.
during the hurricane?
So what happened is it was about the fifth hurricane evacuation warning of the year, and we were due to perform The Maids Times Two in Philadelphia. It was finally, after all these years, I was going to direct a show in Philly proper and
So
bring The
by
Maids
this time,
there.
the Fringe Festival is about 7, 8 years old, and we're going to talk
Yeah,
to Nick
exactly. And so I was like,
Stuccio
oh, this
soon.
Fringe
Yeah,
Festival's gotten serious.
yeah.
I should do my work there. And so we have a giant Mack truck. When the hurricane warning comes, we're like, oh, let's beat traffic. And so all that happened to us is we left about 2 or 3 days earlier. It was about a week or more before Katrina. And we go up to Philly. We're living in various houses in Bucks County. My parents' house is an old cabin in the woods. We would sort of meet up in our cars and make our way to West Philly, where we were performing at the International House. Yeah, one morning, and on our way there, we realized none of our cell phones were working, and that's all we knew. And then all of a sudden, I think a text makes it through
So all
from
your
our
cell
press.
phones were based from a New Orleans number.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
So a press agent gets through on one of our phones that I think wasn't based in New Orleans, is like, you got to get to the theater. The press is waiting for you. And we were like, oh, good job, PR agent. Wow,
Yeah.
press waiting for us. And we pull up, and there must be 8 news vans out in front of the International House. And we're like, okay, this is a little crazy for The Maids. And we quickly got branded the Strand. So they take us downstairs. Fox News actually takes us downstairs, turns on CNN, and films us watching CNN. And my actors start, breaking down in
Of
tears.
course.
And one of the first shots on CNN is actually this body, if people remember, with a garbage bag over it, surrounded by bricks. And
Right.
that was the top of our theater that fell onto the street. Um, and so yeah, it took us a few days, and we realized we lost everything. We all lived in uptown area. That was really, my house got 11 and a half feet of water. Yeah, we opened the show the next day
In
because we were
Philly.
due to open it in
What else are you
Philly.
going to do? Yeah.
And the Fringe Festival was lovely and sold beads on our behalf. Is actually
Oh,
Maggie Di Stefano
right.
who started it all and made us several $1,000s in a couple of days, which we lived on.
Bless her.
And so we were stranded in Philly, and there we stayed.
So your company has stayed in Philadelphia ever since then,
Yep,
and
since 2005.
the performers who came with you, have they remained as well, or have they moved on to
They
other?
stayed for a long time. So what
Yeah.
about 6 of the company members decided to stay. We rebuilt the company from scratch, and I mean from scratch. Like we had to refile paperwork with the IRS. We had no documents proving we existed. It was quite a year and a
So it's a
half.
living theater all over again. Here you are
Yeah,
dealing with
right.
paperwork and the
Oh my
IRS.
God,
Yeah,
that's funny. Uh,
yeah.
and sad. And after about a year and a half, and we reopened Spring Awakening as our launch show, and they said on the opening night of Spring Awakening, like we're gonna go our ways after the show closes, because Philly makes sense to you. It's a full circle for you coming home, but I'm going home to Texas. I'm moving to New York. I'm going back to Louisiana, whatever
Okay.
it was. And they were great. EgoPo owes everything to them. Yeah.
Well, you started doing so you then reinvest in making Philadelphia your home base. And
Hmm.
you started doing themed seasons starting in 2007, 2008 with a Tennessee Williams season. That's very apt for a company from New Orleans, I suppose. But soon you found yourself in a new sort of flood, the post 2008 economic crash. And you still managed to find sort of a high ground amidst the rising waters once again. How do you
Yeah.
did you experience that, or were you already so very fringe that it didn't matter what was happening to the mainstream?
A little of both. I mean, most importantly, the decision to, so after Katrina, all of us had the pleasure and the hell, meaning all of us from New Orleans, the pleasure and the hell of addressing life from scratch. That we could do, we had lost everything, and thus we could do anything. That none of the decisions we had made in life before had to guide me anymore. And so I went through a really deep 3 months of, do I want to be doing theater anymore? And I had to find definitive yeses for every single part of my life. I had to, instead of just being passive and riding the Dow, I had to be decisive. And I decided, yes, this is what I want to do. And when I made that decision, it has made all of the years since then super easy, Peter. Like I went from a complete void of nothingness back to making EgoPo happen. A little financial crash is nothing in comparison. To be honest, I had a very different relationship to the COVID year than everybody else.
Right, right, right. Well, before we get to 2020,
Yeah.
subsequent seasons have also included single playwrights. You would do a season of Beckett, you do a season of John Guare,
Hmm.
you do a season of Ibsen or of Sam Shepard, or you
Hmm.
would concentrate on genres like vaudeville or theater of cruelty and Artaud or queer theater,
Hmm.
or you do time periods like the works from the Harlem Renaissance or
Hmm.
national origin. You do Russian plays or South African plays or Indonesian plays.
Hmm.
And this is all very gratifying to me as a theater history teacher, I've got to say, because in fact, along with I'll mention two other companies here, the Quintessence Theater and the Philadelphia Artist Collective, the PAC,
Yeah.
EgoPo has consistently been the company that is most attuned to the deep history of world theatrical practice
Yeah.
and bringing it into the present moment, keeping it alive. Why has these different ways of structuring your seasons been useful or inspirational?
Because I feel like if you really treat this as an art form, art is a continuity. It doesn't restart after every art piece. A visual artist doesn't go, okay, done that. What's this next blank canvas bring? If you'll notice, visual artists work in themes over many years, like, oh, I'm in my Picasso blue period, and I don't think that's intentional. I don't think he's naming it, but you go through investigations in your life. You are on a journey as an artist. A lot of what I've done is try to find an alternative to the regional theater model in which directors are in 10 different cities over the course of a year, spending 3 weeks directing. None of it's connected, not connected intellectually, not connected spiritually, not connected geographically, stylistically. And I was like, ugh, like that's just is an endless gerbil wheel to me. And I want to find the through line. Like I want to find out 10 years from now that I've gone from A to B and I don't know where that is, but I want to find out. And so the theme seasons allow us to sort of mold and coagulate ideas to create a pathway. It also allows us to really definitively go, what's happening in the world? What's happening inside of ourselves? To ask us those questions before we season plan. And so the theatrical journey from season to season is a kind of like yeah, spiritual journey for us in which we're interacting with our community from season to season.
Right, but you're beginning to find backers and funders and new board members, but you're also finding
Yeah.
new collaborators. I should mention, I
Yeah.
suppose, at this point, the great actress Melanie Julian, who was one of
Yes.
my colleagues at Temple University at present, and also a dialect coach in her own way. This is when
Yeah.
your personal and professional relationship with her begins, I'm assuming.
Yeah, yeah. Personal relationship before, well before professional relationship, but yeah, Brenna Geffers deserves a huge shout out. In the early years of EgoPo here in Philadelphia, she was directing half the shows with me and really helped guide the vision of the company before she got an opportunity to start her own company, which is awesome and exciting. And yeah, there's
Ross
been a lot of different
Ross Beshler as
collaborators.
well. Yeah.
And Ross, absolutely, who's now a colleague of mine at Rowan. I've gotten to a point in my life where it's like I want to be in a room with people that I love being in a room with. If we had a great process, why shouldn't we do that process again?
Right. But then COVID-19 then affects
Mm.
everyone in the theater world, and it shuts down live production. But
Yeah.
how did that affect your work and what you're able then, the direction you're able to take Ego Po in?
Yeah, we pivot really quickly. We were actually a week away from opening the last play of our Shepherd season and had to put it all on ice, literally just left the set where it was
Right. A lot of people did that.
for almost a year.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had a great managing director at the time, Katrina Foy, and I went to her and go, look, what we do is we look at the given circumstances of life and we make work in response to it. Because, as a mid-sized company, your budget can go up and down really dramatically with a single foundation changing its goals. And you have
And
to
a
just,
lot of foundations were shifting after COVID. They
oh,
began shifting away from artistic funding and towards social justice funding and things like that.
it was a huge shift. But in this case was also I wanted to deal with the physical realities of that we were stuck inside our houses and how do you make theater? And I like,
Mhm.
look, we made it through Hurricane Katrina, and we're
Right.
going to make it through this. And I think the most important thing is we don't stop. Where I have to do as a person, what I discovered since Hurricane Katrina is just put another foot in front of the other. Go very Beckettian of just keep on going. And so we just put our heads together and began just really fun brainstorming. And we very quickly went, go back to EgoPo roots, go back, get more experimental, like stop trying to please funders, just do what we think will actually have impact right now at this moment. And Brenna created this brilliant mail-in theater piece called Emily about Emily Dickinson, in which the audience for 12 weeks got mailed correspondences with Emily Dickinson.
Yeah.
And then we pivoted. The really big breakthrough was returning to rockabye. And it was really big, right? I hadn't done rockabye up until now. And I realized I'm living in a house with an amazing equity actor and we can't leave. So we should make theater. And we, through a very lengthy process, convinced equity to allow us to do the first equity contract in which Melanie would sit in front of the window from inside of our house and perform for one audience member at a time on the other side of the window. And so we did
This is
rockabye
your
for
house in
one
South Philadelphia. Yeah.
yeah, and so
Yeah.
audiences would meet on a corner, get led down a back alley, and into our backyard. They didn't know whose backyard they were in, and sit down, and the blinds would go up, and there would be a woman, and rockabye would happen across the pane of glass. And
Wow.
so that's
Oh,
actually the first equity show to happen in America post-COVID. And then we did a drive-in piece up in North Philly, a version of Nocturne, in which the audience watched from inside their cars and listened to it on the radio and used their headlights to light the show. And so we just slowly responded to wherever we were in COVID and began, opening the doors basically.
but then you burst international boundaries once again. You start your
Yeah.
crossing oceans season of
Oceans.
2023-24, and you produce Le
Yeah.
Blanc by Lorraine
Yeah.
Hansberry, which is about the West going into Africa and colonialism. But then you do something even more grandiose, and you return to your journey before. You go back to Indonesia and revisit the Ramayana. Do you go back and contact the artists you have been working with back in the 90s?
Oh yeah. So, and it was actually several years of building before it got to, the execution point of it. So we had been taking small contingents back to Indonesia, met with our old crew, met new crews. Some of our old crew had passed away, met new companies and re-put together a sort of community of collaborators. And then eventually took 12 American actors to Java and did the first developmental. It was 5 weeks in Java to develop the next phase of the piece. And then eventually the entire Indonesian contingent of 14 came back to Philly 6 weeks more of rehearsal here in Philly, and then opened it
Yeah, so
under a
you had a contingent of
tent
Philadelphia
yard.
actors, Damien and Melanie and
Amy
others.
Wallace, Ontaria, Melanie,
Right.
Ross. Yeah,
Yeah, and then you brought it back to Philadelphia, and you're doing it
right.
in an outdoor in a huge tent in down at the
Yeah,
Navy Yard, went far south
yep,
Philadelphia, an amazing prospect for almost a secret area of Philadelphia, which no one knows about. This former naval installation, which is now a
yeah,
mixed commercial use development, and you sort
yeah,
of opened that space up to these some huge puppets. I mean, not life size. I mean, God-sized puppets as well
yeah.
as live action, and you incorporate live music, both Indonesian and Western. And Jay, right, starts
Jay Ansel did the music, yeah,
Ansel, right,
with Moang, our Indonesian collaborator, yeah.
right, right. So that was, I remember going to see it with my friend Dave Ingram. And of course, as a theater history professor, I'd been telling my kids, it was after the semester was over, I was saying, okay, you all have to go down and see the Ramayana. This is what I was talking about. I hope some of them got there. But now I want to talk to you about your 32nd season, which you recently completed.
Hmm.
And this was a tribute to Philadelphia theater history, as well as the 250th anniversary of America. Now, full disclosure, I acted in the minor capacity of a historical consultant. And I remember going down to meet with you and Devin in South Philly, and you had a copy of my book. And I'm like, oh, this is great. Uh, why did you want to do that for the
I mean, it's
70th
only so minor,
centennial?
Peter.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's only so minor. I mean, if it wasn't for your book, this season doesn't happen. I mean, Gab, our current general manager, and Devin and I had talked about doing something semi-quincentennial about 2 years
mm-hmm.
before, and I did some research and was like, I'm not getting
What is there?
excited.
What is there?
Uh, and
Does Philadelphia
then
even have a theater history? Yeah,
exactly. And I hadn't targeted to Philly yet. I hadn't made that jump. And
right.
then it was an article about you and your that you had written, and then your book that caused me to really go, oh, I got it. Hey guys, put on hold what we were planning. I need to do a deeper dive into this. And so every single choice we made was inspired by you and your work.
Oh my gosh.
And the idea that there was a potential through line and arc, and just what that arc could mean. And the moment I picked up Gemini and read it, went, oh my God, this play is amazing. It
And
was
it's
done.
set in the where you were living right then.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I was like, I know it ends with this. It
Right.
didn't turn out ending with that. It was Sonia
Well,
Sanchez,
it
but
stopped there.
um,
So you did a stage reading of Edwin Forrest's amazing The Gladiator by Dr. Bird, which is all in the book, and I talked about it
yep.
on the podcast. You did that at Carpenter's Hall, and you did the Show Off, a stage reading of George S. Kelly's play, The Show Off, just like a one-up, but it was amazing. I'd never seen it done so Philly-centered before. Because he really knew those people, and
Hmm.
I had never seen that explored so thoroughly before. And then you also, for a gala, you produced Clifford Odets, a play Waiting for Lefty, which again has a lot of
Hmm.
Philly roots, and he collaborated with a lot of leftist Philadelphia thinkers when he was working on that.
Hmm.
And then your production of Albert Inarato's Gemini, which we've talked about already on the podcast, and I was able to meet a lot of Albert's family were there on the opening night. It was very meaningful that he had been so sort of estranged from, I think, a lot of his Philly roots, and it was amazing to see them sort of reassemble once again in the room, literally,
Hmm.
and watch that show come to life again. I can't tell you how much it meant to me personally. And
Mm.
how did you feel these works landed with the Philadelphia audiences in this current fraught historical moment?
I thought it was great. I think everybody really understood and came along with the idea that we were spending a year exploring our own version of patriotism, that patriotism didn't have to become a dirty word, that we could re-own it, but on our terms. And just that concept was the driving force of the whole year. And I think people came along fully with it. I think it was super interesting for people to experience all of the theater history that you had charted and to experience it live in three dimensions in front of them, which is really what the whole year ends up being. Waiting for Lefty was hugely successful, and I love it when it's something that's so silly I'm almost embarrassed to tell people the idea. And when a show succeeds in that way, I love it. So the idea of being in a giant Italian banquet hall and having a union dinner in deep South Philly was great. And honestly, what really surprised me the most was just how excited people got about the really older historical pieces.
Right. Well, I recently was able to be a guest at your ending season gala, which was in the Friends Meeting House on Arch Street. Again, violating centuries of Quaker tradition, but Quakers are fine with that. They're not going to get upset. But I could see all the supporters and people from the local area who are now so invested in the journey you've been going on over the past 20 years. And now I'll give you a chance to talk about what you're doing next, because that's what you ended up talking about the end of this evening. You are really going to take a look back at the works that EgoPo has already produced and examine them again, or things that have been important to you, but in a very different and personal way. So where are you going next?
Yeah, the season was inspired by the idea of 33, which is our 33 season, and the idea of a mirroring or looking at yourself. And we wanted to do a season that was self-reflective, but we kept digging, and eventually it was about the fact that what concerns us the most right now is a sense of isolation that we're all experiencing still post-COVID, that in some ways the isolation bubbles have not disappeared, and it's
because of social media, the way we tend to consume things on phones, looking, even when I'm backstage at the theater, everyone who's not immediately on stage is sitting there in the dark looking at their phone. Even at that moment of which should be a moment of extreme communality, we are so isolated.
As a company that's devoted to the physical self, the idea that the body is almost like disintegrating away, this idea of introspection. And then we were like, oh, that's EgoPo's roots. So it's a season about going back to our roots and going immersion. So it was about things that will bring us to ourselves, to our own bodies, so that we can better connect to other people. There were 4 pieces, and some of them are radical to return to, one of them being company, the audience on their back in the dark, and it hasn't been done since COVID because it's an incredibly intimate piece. And so it's a little bit of like, screw this, we're okay having that level of intimacy in theater again, and we're going to do it. So season opens with a revisioning of Doll's House, which Brenna had done as a one-girl show back in 2017. This is not a one-girl show anymore, but it is being performed by an 11-year-old, my daughter. And so I am actually playing Torvald. I would be on stage for the first time in over 30 years. Super immersive in the Franklin Inn. You actually enter her playroom. The audience will sit on bean bags and have cotton candy, and they actually play in her doll's house through this version of Doll's House.
So you're continuing to invest not only in your future, but you realize that theater is connected to a river flowing way back into the past and rushing back to the present. That's what I'm always trying to talk about when I come with theater history, is that we're in a time machine all the time, and we're rushing back and forth. That's what makes it such an exciting thing to work on. Well, Lane, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you, Peter, for just all of your passion and your diligence in making connections historically and in the present. Like, you are in a constant state of telling our story. And without somebody telling our story, we don't really exist. And so deeply appreciative.
Oh, well, my pleasure in so many ways. All right. Thank you, Lane. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care, Peter.
And that's the show for today. My thanks again to Lane, as well as to Devin Roberts and Gab Fischetti in the EgoPo organization, and to their loyal board members, their supporters, and their audience for supporting its work. All right, I have a little announcement here. I will be taking a break from the podcast during the month of July and getting a long-delayed chance to rest and recharge from what has been a really busy and productive 2 solid years of work here at the Tower of Theater History. I will queue up some encore episodes in the interim. Once I come back at the end of the summer, I hope to spend from that point on till the remainder of 2026 wrapping up this extended journey of Season 4 and telling the stories of even more cutting-edge and innovative Philadelphia theater companies, as well as interviews with long-time and important Philadelphia theater artists. And you know what? If you've been enjoying and valuing the work we do on this podcast, or have any thoughts or suggestions or compliments, you can drop me an email at aithpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. And to support the work I'm doing here, and to get access to our monthly bonus episodes and special members-only content, go to www.patreon.com/AITHpodcast. Or, a free and easy way to support us is just leave a review about the show on Apple Podcasts. Or you can visit us on the website, do it right there. And you can follow us on Facebook and leave a review about the wealth of images, photos, and mini essays we share there. So many ways to help us out that won't cost you a thing. We appreciate any effort you can do in that regard. And for no charge at all, folks, there's also additional images and information, as always, at our website, www.aithpodcast.com. The links for all of these are right in the show notes, or just search for us on the web. We're the only Philly theater history podcast out there. Look for my book, and as you know, it's also called Adventures in Theater History, Philadelphia. It's at all online retailers, you know the ones, or you can follow the link on the website and find a good link to the publisher, or you can find it at your local independent bookstore. Thanks to all of you for listening to the show today, and for coming along on another adventure in theater history, Philadelphia.